So yes, Nick Moore from Mackay. I've been here for a little while, and yeah, one of my favourite styles of catching barra, and obviously with being in Mackay you've got some decent impoundments around here, with Kinchinton and Timbra, and one of my favourite styles of catching barra is the double clutch and jerkbaiting barra. So this is a shallow running jerkbait, or relatively shallow running jerkbait. One of my favourites. They really do catch a decent amount of fish. They go well in the salt. They've been barra tuned, so they come with decent terminals and decent end points, etc. And you can see it's got the wire through the bibs, so they actually last. You don't break bibs on them. Yeah, it's really good, really decent jerkbait. One of the funnest styles to catch barra, in my opinion. The two retrieves that is often used on jerk baits is a quite an aggressive hit on a slack line, which gets it darting around, and then you end up pausing it, and you can actually jerk them pretty fast. So sort of 2 jerks every, say, 2 seconds. So it's jerk 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 jerk, that sort of thing. And you can hit, but you need to hit them on slack line. So, and instead of, what that actually means is, instead of pulling them with the line taut, you want a bit of slack, like a little bit of a loop off the end of your rod, and that's quite important, because that's what actually makes it dart. If you're pulling them on a straight line, it sort of just pulls them through the water straight. So that's the one thing. The other slower retrieve is same sort of a thing, but you're just less aggressive on the rod tip. So just slower little hits, and it still darts, but it's a bit more finesse, and they then will dive to a slightly deeper depth, because they will hold their depth better with that slow action. You're not sort of pulling them up, they're not fighting them. The other thing that you can do to either increase depth or make them run shallower is obviously your 2 different leaders, fluorocarbon sinks, so that will keep it down a little bit more. It does make a slight difference on when you doing those slower retrieves. And then obviously mono floats. So if you really get into the finer details, you can do that sort of stuff with your jerk baits too. So typically I'll fish it to between 3 foot and 5 foot. It will achieve that relatively easy. You can sort of get down to 6 foot at times, but generally it likes around that 5 foot mark. Yeah, between 3 and 5 foot, it's pretty good. So it is a slightly shallow running jerkbait, which is pretty good. There's a lot of times that it is needed in the impoundments, shallow running jerkbaits, but also really good for your salt creeks where you're fishing drains and that shallower water. So there you won't get away with deep diving jerkbaits typically. To be honest, I have a jerkbait tied on most of the times, and a lot of the times I will have a shallow and a deep diving jerkbait. Typically the shallow running jerkbaits are generally like around your lower light areas at night, when you have your cloud cover, that sort of stuff, and the fish are quite active when they're active in the column and they're not sort of sulking on the bottom. When they're sort of sulking on the bottom, that's where you go to your deeper style jerkbaits. So as soon as the fish are becoming active, etc., then I will go to shallow, because barra generally feed upwards and they're looking upwards, so just keeping it above their heads. So you need to get feedback from your sounder to ensure what depth they're at, and when they're active, run a shallow one. Yeah, so typical cast for barra in the impoundments is you want to be literally casting into the weed if you can, okay, and the edge of that weed bed. Being quite a narrow jerkbait and with a narrow bib, if you give it some few hard hits it will actually pull through the weed. And a lot of the time, those barra are sitting just on the edges of that weed bed. So as soon as it pulls out of that weed bed and it darts out of that weed bed, etc., it catches their attention and they strike at it out of reaction. On your open flats, etc., you obviously want to fish it slightly slower, get it down a little bit deeper, and fish it methodically. Most of my jerk baits, I generally try to get rid of the rings, etc., and I just go with a loop knot. Less things in my terminals to go wrong. To me, it takes 2 seconds to retie a knot, etc. The disadvantage is if you're changing a lot, you end up having to change your leaders as well over time. So, but to me, it's worthwhile just getting rid of an extra connection.